applications of GenAI is basically wherever human intervention is required. How can I make it faster? How can I train a model that can behave like a human? What then GenAI can do is look at that data, look at the previous medical records, look at the lab reports that same hospital provider has, and be able to predict. You and I both have maybe 10 years of annual data. We have multiple reports, but they're all lying there somewhere. Yes,
Exactly.
some of them have been digitized, some have not. Some are sitting with one hospital, then we change country and city. This is sitting with another.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second podcast episode, where we dive into the transformative world of generative AI and its impact on the healthcare industry. I'm thrilled to have our insightful speaker with us once again as we explore this cutting-edge technology. In this episode, we will uncover how generative AI is currently being utilized in healthcare and its most promising applications. Welcome back, Amit. It's fantastic to have you back.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Rakesh.
Very cool. And Amit, last time we ended with getting into the AI mode in terms of earlier we spoke about data security, ethical, unethical approaches, what one can do to protect data sanctity, and largely focusing on how organizations can monetize data, right? And now I think it's in this episode I want to primarily focus on generative AI and take your views and expertise on a bunch of topics that I want to cover. So let me start with question number one. How do you see generative AI being used in healthcare industry, and what are its most promising applications?
So, GenAI is a very broad subject, yes, and I think everybody is it's like a big dinosaur, and everybody is trying to touch one part of it. Somebody touches the head, somebody the tail, and is trying to make sense of it. It hasn't been around for that long. Maybe in research purposes, maybe in government networks and security systems, but in real main life, I think it's only about a year and 4 months ago, when Microsoft talked about ChatGPT and investment in OpenAI, that when the whole Pandora's box opened, and then people learned about NVIDIA as a company. Nobody knew NVIDIA as a company 2 years ago, unless you were a big gaming buff. So I think for the applications of GenAI is basically wherever human intervention is required. How can I make it faster? How can I train a model that can behave like a human and act like a human and use the intelligence that humans train it with to be able to do things more efficiently, more accurately, more compliant, more legal, and also stop bad things from happening. But again, I do believe it's been around for a long time, especially in banking, financial. When people check, okay, do you have a bank account in another country? Are you paying taxes? I'm sure they're not looking at each record manually. They were already doing something like GenAI a long time before. But in healthcare, GenAI has huge applications. Again, the way I say it is, I have data, I've processed it. Now, what do I do with it? So what do I do with it is where GenAI comes in.
Right.
Yeah. And how can I do it faster? That's where GenAI comes in. So in healthcare, if you collect all these records, like we were talking in the previous podcast, and then you process it, and then you find who the patients are that would be interested in your clinical trial. Question is, GenAI can now go contact these automatically. Like an agentic AI, it can start calling these. It can find out from the details, from the records, and they start calling them and have a first level conversation with them. So that is the power of it. Because in the non-Gen AI world, you would have basically create and then give it to a call center. They would have then called the people to make a decision on whether they consent to participate. Similarly, if you remember in the previous podcast, we talked about sales teams launching something. Now, Gen AI, what it can do is it can process all your clinical data, what the capability of your sales rep is, and create material for each of the sales rep to go sell to doctors. Before, if there was no Gen AI, you would create one set of material, every rep will talk exactly the same thing.
Right.
Now you can personalize for each rep, depending on which region he is, what type of doctors he is reaching. And we are getting to a stage where GenAI can even create material or customize it for each doctor
Hmm.
you're visiting. So if
Right.
you go to
Right.
12 doctors as a sales rep, it can tell you exactly what to say to each of the doctors
Mhm.
based on
Uh,
their profile, based on your strengths, based on how the doctor is recommending. So as
right.
many data points you put into the LLM, the stronger it gets, the GenAI
Uh,
model, and the better your insights will.
right. Right. Oh, that's really really interesting and insightful, and I think it's really exciting to uh, just hear you ideate about things. And I'm sure that these are practically these items are practically in place, and many are getting innovated. And but it's really really going to be an exciting world. However, with everything new, there are challenges. And
Mhm.
how do you see, Gen AI use bringing any kind of data breach, privacy, or ethical challenges that organizations have to keep in mind and address?
Sure. I think the first challenge with GenAI is it's only as good as what you train it to be. You
Right.
know, so if you have a horse, and you
Uh,
participate in horse racing,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
train your horse, you feed your horse.
Yeah.
If you have a boxing academy,
Uh,
you train
uh,
your boxer. It's the
right.
same way. Gen AI is like your boxer or your horse. If it
Uh,
needs to win really the triple crown type races, it
uh,
has to be trained well. It
uh,
has to be given quality data, just like your
uh,
horse needs quality food.
right.
You
Right.
It needs the right injections, it needs the right treatment, it doesn't need illegal substance.
Uh,
It will be compliant and checked before the race. Same thing with AI models as well.
that's
AI
correct.
models, LLMs are available, but to train
Uh,
them and coach them on your data and
uh,
your area of operation, you need quality data.
right.
That improves the accuracy. Because
Uh,
today I can tell you, if the model spews out, then okay, put 200 reps. This is how you should split this out. This is what your marketing material says. Just don't do it blindly, because there is an
right.
accuracy to it.
Right.
Yeah, it,
Right.
it might, based on the quality of the data you've input, the output will be dependent on that.
Right.
Maybe the material does not make sense when your regulatory medical people look at it. They say, nah,
Exactly.
don't say that. Say
Yeah.
this, change this, edit
Yeah.
this. That is what we should be doing.
I relate to that, and
Yeah.
of course, LLMs. Uh, I mean, they have the basic layer, understanding layer in place, but you need to keep working and educating them to get the right thing out of that model. And I'm able to connect the dot to, even basic things like fundamental of prompts, right? When you
Mhm.
work with let's say, even when you work with, let's say, ChatGPT,
Yeah.
just asking it one question is probably not giving you the right data or right response, and you need to keep curating your prompt to get better,
Correct.
results out of it. And I believe that that's the same science that one has to apply when it comes to uh, teaching your AI model, training it better, and training it to be sensitive about, also being sensitive about the security, privacy, and
Yeah.
ethical aspects of medical data engineering specifically.
Yeah.
That's really really valid.
Correct.
The next question is, how do you see generative AI in reducing? I mean, uh, we talk to a lot of healthcare providers, and the major pain point of this large integrator providers is the administrative work, right?
Mhm.
The repetitive work, the manual work, and they want their healthcare providers to focus on giving patient care and more least amount of time, or free up their mind share and their workload to focus on patient care and not on the administrative work. How do you see generative AI helping here?
Sure. So I think two things. One is
Yeah.
a lot of the repetitive work, or what we call RPA,
Yeah.
this will get automated. Now, this was
Right.
already getting automated with AI. So,
Uh-huh.
but what happens now is that once the AI sort of, say, we were talking in a previous podcast about synthesizing the data. If the doctor makes
Right.
any notes after seeing a patient, how is
Yeah.
that immediately digitized, aggregated, de-identified, put into a pot?
Uh,
What then Gen AI can do is look at that data, look
uh,
at the previous medical records, look at the
uh,
lab reports that same hospital provider has, and be able to predict that, okay, is the patient going to get a heart attack in
right.
16 months,
Right.
in 6 months, in 12 months, in
Right.
18 months? Is he
So,
suffering from anything chronic, serious that's going to happen? you know. So this is now the advantage. You're automating a lot of things. You're asking with Gen AI, you're asking questions that you never imagined you could ask.
Understood.
You know,
Yep.
you could find an answer to. Even if you asked, you would be wasting your time because nobody would know the answer. Now you can ask those questions. There's no holds barred.
Right.
You can ask questions that you would not anything that you imagine under the sun. Maybe it will get the wrong answer, but who cares? But ask it to 4 different LLMs.
Exactly. Exactly.
They might have been trained with 4 different sets of data, and you will be able to get 4 different answers. You can triangulate them.
That's correct.
Right. And accuracy will gradually improve as well. So that is where there's huge savings. I see a patient, I'm spending 80% of my time seeing a patient, engaging with them, giving them care. But all the backend in terms of collecting of my data, automating, Gen AI is also helping with even billing, catching any issues in billing. If the doctor provided a wrong code, Gen AI can correct it. Then it can go to the right reimbursement. It can go to the right insurance company. Gen AI can check if the insurance company has changed this year in January for that particular patient, or is it the same as last year? A lot of these things were being done manually by a battalion of people in the back office, and they were asking questions back to the doctor. Doctor was spending so much time answering those. And this was all administrative stuff that we can start cutting. But again, it cannot be done blindly. It has to be done. And
obviously, it has to be taught. You have to experiment with it. You have to teach it. You have to iterate it. As you correctly said, you have to triangulate to the right solution. And I think that's I would say the most important takeaway. I think there is in my opinion, there is a big misconception in the industry, typically in the tech industry, that AI is going to take away what I do, but that's not the case. I think it's actually going to help you to do things better if you are able to work with it in a logical way. And I think that's like really, really important. I was going to ask you one question, but you probably touched base upon it in your previous answer. But let me ask you anyways. Do you have any examples of where generative AI has improved outcomes for patient or patient care dramatically?
Yeah, I think referring to what I was talking earlier about predictive analytics around any patient diseases that they're likely to have. So you're seeing now that, you put a lot of your 23andMe type genetic data, any lab reports you have, any annual reports you've done, any recent x-rays you've done, any blood tests you've done. You can now start aggregating a lot of this and start predicting. So insurance companies would be very interested in this. When they insure every patient, they want to see with all of this data and run it through an AI model to see what's the likelihood of a spend on this patient during his lifespan. Is he going to suffer from skin disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, heart attack? What would it be? Would he need a transplant of any of his organs? They can start now looking at it. There are very sophisticated tools that are now able to detect from mammograms breast cancer or predict breast cancer.
Right.
So even now we are using that in trials. We are using this in improving efficiency of operations. We're using this in reducing the cost of insurance. So this is starting to make very meaningful difference in a patient's life. If supposing today I have, you and I both have maybe 10 years of annual data. We have multiple reports, but they're all lying there somewhere. Yes, some of them have been digitized, some have not. Some are sitting with one hospital, then we change country and city, is sitting with another. If we're able to bring a lot of this together, we might start predicting, what I might get next. So that is something that is very, very powerful for patients. And that's why one thing we notice is patients are very willing to now share their data. Because with cloud and the regulations and everything, they feel data is secure.
Exactly. The next question I was going to ask you was exactly about what's the role of data security, right? And I believe you were referencing it in a way of patient confidence. The individual having the confidence that my data is still going to be secure. So what do you see the role of the data security in general when data is being exposed in a way to generative AI for consumption?
Sure. So I think there's some level of skepticism that, once I share the data and the model gets trained, is my data needed as well? or is it secure because I'm transferring it and using it for training? Will it get misused? So there
Right.
are still regulations developing around that. That's why you see a lot of companies are saying, okay, I don't want to give my data to public LLMs. I
Right.
want to create a contract with that LLM, create a private LLM
Exactly.
foundational model that I'll train on. I don't need anybody else's data. I'll train it
Yep.
on my data. So
Yep.
that is a little bit of that my space for my data type thing that is
Yep.
happening.
Yep.
A lot of
And
companies
we
are
experience that too. We experience that
yeah,
when when we are doing multiple projects with, specifically in the healthcare space. Our clients are really, really focused and critical about data security, and
yeah,
specifically when it comes to AI or any kind of generative AI work, they actually want to protect their data by creating their own instances.
yeah.
Right?
Because
It's
think
not in
about
the
it.
public domain, and
Yeah.
including the use of we use a lot of co-pilot abilities for
Mhm.
even writing requirements to user stories to test scenarios, and also taking assistance in coding, but we do that in the customer's environment. We don't go outside, right?
Yeah,
And I believe that is the current way of looking at things, and this is yet to evolve completely. So
yeah, yeah.
I
With
believe it
the
will take some time to for I believe there will be learnings and there will be corrections that will put the industry at I think at some point of pivoting, that okay, now we can do it openly.
yeah,
I take that.
think about it. If you had a Google just for your own company, and a
Exactly.
Google search bar, and you can only search in the data of your own company,
Right.
that's the level of talking we're doing. You
Yeah.
cannot even imagine. Today we go to Google search bar and we type something. We
Yeah.
expect anything under the sun to show up there. But
Absolutely.
so today
Absolutely.
we're not there with GenAI. Every
Yeah.
company is
Yeah.
holding on because they're developing
Exactly.
products out of it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
remember, if
Absolutely.
I train the model with my data, I get a better product. Then I monetize that.
Exactly. Exactly.
Then I
Exactly.
create it into a offering.
Yep. So, exactly, I agree. And I think everybody is in a very nascent stage as far as generative AI or general AI consumption is concerned. But I think that's fair. That's fair. That's how things progress. It's a step to ensure that your information, data, and IP, because there is a lot of IP that is getting generated.
Yeah.
Right. And that is protected. And I think, everybody should do that. But eventually, I think things will open up a lot.
Yeah.
One thing I actually wanted to, this is more of a selfish question, right? And that I had not thought about this question earlier, but now that I'm conversing with you, what would be your guidance for organizations like us? Like we are in the tech space, we are with services, application development, AI solutions, automation space, and we do a lot of work in healthcare. However, when we want to set a vision for ourselves, right? What would be your guidance for organizations like us?
Sure. I think two things. One is evolutionary and one is revolutionary. Evolutionary is if you're already into AI, machine learning, see how you can start answering the question, so what?
Right.
So how can I help you now sort of train models, generate an offering based on your data, your client's data, and really help them create a tool that can really automate a process and then take it a few steps forward as well. Like we talked about, even predicting what illnesses might happen in the future if it's a healthcare provider or an insurance company. The second thing is more revolutionary, which I'm also seeing. Yesterday you saw MicroStrategy remove the word micro, as
Exactly.
only
Yeah.
strategy.
Yeah.
So these things are going to happen. That companies will completely pivot from being a machine learning, automation, database company into being a purely AI company.
You're right. Right.
Yeah, and they'll say, okay, we're shedding a lot of other assets. We're going to disrupt. We're going to leapfrog and go into AI space. And there's a lot to do there because when we think about it, today we are talking about what chips to use. NVIDIA is a chip company. They don't make software. When were we talking about AWS and Azure, what chips they use?
Exactly.
I don't even remember we ever talked that.
Yep.
Yeah. So we always talk about, okay, what's the power of Azure and AWS and how do I collect my data and how do I access it faster? And, how do I make it into edge data and edge computing and all of that? We were not talking. So we are in a very infancy stage where companies are still talking about nuts and bolts. How do I make a building? But the money is really in how do I leverage this infrastructure, what applications to create from it, what questions to answer, how do I train it better, how do I then create and package it into a product, put a name on it, and then start subscribing.
Exactly.
I think that is where a lot of money is. So if companies are looking at, evolutionary, move from AI, ML, and in programming and coding into helping training applications and creating applications, harnessing the data. Revolutionary is really look at, how do I create software offerings, applications.
I understood. And thank you very much for that guidance. That's really, really insightful. And I'm sure that we are going to, adapt that methodology of thinking and in the work that we do. And I'm sure that it's going to help us. And I'm also going to hold you on guiding us more in the future. We are going to keep pinging you for that.
Sure, no problem. Absolutely.
Thank you for tuning into this exciting episode on the transformative impact of generative AI in healthcare. We delve into its current uses, ethical challenges, administrative benefits, and real-world improvements in patient care, and the essential role of data security. A big thank you to Amit for shedding light on these promising developments. Join us next time